the comic book industry has lost one of its great ones. Now, I will say, I am thankful and grateful for him, Jim Shooter, that he seemed to have lived a very long and very fulfilled life doing something that he actually loved to do. That's what it appears. I mean, you never really know what's going on behind the scenes in someone's life. His time at Marvel was done before I started reading comic books. I'm not like some people that started reading comic books really young. Like a lot of people started when they were like 8 and 9 years old. I didn't start until I was 12, 11, 12, somewhere around there, which is still young. 11, 12, yeah, somewhere around there. Still young, but not definitely not as young as some people and not as long. And there was a break where I wasn't collecting comic books, and I've went over all of this before. I won't rehash that. But anyway, the thing I do recognize, and I did not recognize this at the time, as I got into comic books, inevitably, if you get into comic books, what'll happen is you'll start doing some back research into characters that you love. Some people will go really in depth. You have levels. My memory is not the greatest. I go in depth to a degree, to a point. Learn what I need to learn, figure out what I need to figure out, and then I move on. Some of this stuff I remember, a lot of it I don't. If you ask me a question offhand about something that happened in comic history, I might go look it up and then go, oh yeah, I did know this. But like I said, my memory is just not that great when it comes to most things. But I realized most of the comic book runs that I will hold up as some of the best, Jim Shooter was at Marvel during these runs. I'm primarily a Marvel guy. I've always said that before. There's independent companies I've loved. Image when it first started. I read some comics out of Image now, obviously, but Image is kind of a different entity. I'm not going to rehash that either. But Marvel was the company that I followed primarily growing up. I gravitated more toward their characters. Batman was the exception. I love Batman. There's something about Batman. He just connects with everyone. I think everyone in some degree can identify with Batman. Obviously, not all of us are rich and all of us have his money, but we're normal people. And that just made you connect. But there was something about the Marvel universe that was always like so good. And much of what Jim Shooter fostered at Marvel during his time there is really what made Marvel the company that I love. Obviously not the only thing, but his presence was definitely felt. And I think he set an example that many comic book executives can follow and actually make some pretty good comic book companies. So we're going to get into this article right here, and we might get into a little bit of things. Legendary Marvel Editor-in-Chief Jim Shooter passes away at age 73. Jim Shooter stands as one of the most influential figures in comic book history, with a career that began remarkably early and spans decades of industry leadership. Starting his professional writing career at DC Comics at just 13 years old. And you know what's interesting? There's actually a lot of writers and artists back in the day that started when they were extremely young. And I didn't know this. There's another artist that started really young. And I literally saw an interview. This was a couple of months ago. Wish I can remember the name. But a similar story. Started out at a very young age and, started drawing comic books. And I'm like, this is insane. This is insane. Shooter sold stories that appeared in Action Comics and Adventure Comics beginning in July of 1966. And look, let me just say, the determination of a young man that would say, I am going to write comic books. I'm going to write for this comic book company. Now, back in the day, comic book companies weren't accepted or seen as serious as they are now. So I definitely could see how this happened. Now, I wonder if they knew he was 13. I don't know. He wrote extensively for the Legion of Superheroes during what many critics consider the team's most iconic era. Now let this sink in, that at 13 years old, he was able to write these stories that were no doubt very good stories. I think there has been a what's the word I'm looking for? A degradation in scholastics, in education, in aptitude toward writing. Right, when you think about writing, storytelling, it's not seen as such a big deal, but a person's ability to use their imagination, tell a story, craft a story, actually has a big impact on their intellect, in my humble opinion. And I'll say I'm in this category, right? Of the degeneration of scholastics. I don't think my mind works as well as somebody like this. This is crazy. I need to get better. I need to do better. I think even as you get older, you can still do better, read and sharpen your mind. So this has kind of inspired me to do some exercises to sharpen my mind a little more. Let's see. His work at DC spanned titles such as Superman, Superboy, World's Finest, and Captain Action, continuing until 1970, establishing him as a prodigious talent who could craft compelling superhero narratives from an extraordinarily young age 13. Like that, I cannot stop thinking about that at age 13. So what does that say about Jim Shooter? Jim Shooter knew a good story when he saw it. And this also means that he knew when a story wasn't good. If you brought him something that was just straight up trash, he would probably push it back on you like, no, come back when you have something that actually works. It says Shooter is best known for his tenure as Marvel's comics editor-in-chief, where he transformed the company into the dominant force it remains today. He created the groundbreaking Secret Wars crossover event in the early 1980s, which became the bestseller and sold more copies than any other comic in the previous 25 years, essentially inventing the modern mega crossover format that would become a staple of the industry. Beyond Marvel, Shooter co-founded and served as editor-in-chief of Valiant Comics from 1991 to 1992, creating the Valiant universe and many of its original characters, and later launched additional publishing ventures, including Defiant and Broadway Comics. And I actually have some of those early Valiant comics in my collection, in my short boxes. And look, man, this dude definitely had an impact. I wanted to check out this other article written by R.S. Martin. It says, Jim Shooter, A Second Opinion. This is a revised and expanded version of an article that was originally published at the Hooded Utilitarian on January 7th, 2013. Jim Shooter does the best job he can, takes great pride in his work, and is genuinely dedicated to publishing the highest quality comics or Marvel comics ever. That speaks volumes right there. Many people understand, or let's say there are a lot of people who love comic books, love creating comic books, but maybe don't understand to the level that Jim Shooter understood. You have to love this at a level where you bring fans the same things you would want to see. And I think that's where a lot of companies go wrong. If I were to create a comic book, the biggest thing on my mind would be this: one, what story do I want to tell? How do I want to tell this story? And would I, as a fan, even read this story? I think sometimes that's just not considered at all when creating comic books. Jim Shooter, the editor in chief of Marvel Comics between 1978 and 1987, that's a long run. And some of the best stories came out during this time, is a key figure in the history of North American comics publishing. Comics publishing. He may also be the most disparaged. He may also be the most disparaged. Tom Spurgeon and Jordan Raphael in 2004 in their 2004 book Stan Lee and the Rise and Fall of the American Comic Book described Marvel under his tenure as a wasteland of formulaic self-imitation. Page 204. Shooter himself is characterized as the most reviled figure in comics and a pariah in the comics industry to this day. Now, the reason I wanted to go to this, and I won't spend too much time here, is I believe after looking over his career and looking over what he did, I believe the reason he was viewed this way is because he demanded excellence. Does this mean that what is created by people will always be perfect? No, by no means. But he demanded excellence. And this is what I've learned. I learned this working many jobs. There are bosses that I've had over the years that I did not like, that I was just like, oh my goodness, this dude, he wants me to do this and he wants me to do that. And I still talk to some of those bosses to this day, because you know what I realized at some point? I was a younger man, and as I got older, I realized, these men actually brought excellence out of my performance at work, and that's what they expected. They would accept nothing less. And I'm thankful I learned that lesson from these men. That was something valuable. And because I think some people don't learn that lesson. Look, we're all going to have bosses that we don't like. But because some people don't learn that lesson, they don't understand nor see the effects that a boss demanding and expecting excellence has on his people. He's not demanding excellence because he's just trying to slave drive. He wants to put out a good product, and he wants you to put in your best work. This is only going to make you better and the company better. It makes you more marketable. If you could say, I worked on this thing that did amazing at this company, people are going to go, wow, you did? Contact your other company. Yep, he worked on this. You're hired. Man, he was a visionary. Oftentimes, and this is what I found, oftentimes the visionaries aren't understood until they pass away. A good example of that is Steve Jobs. I'm not telling you he was a perfect man, but Steve Jobs was a visionary, and many people didn't see nor understand that until he passed away. Shooter is best known for his tenure at Marvel as editor-in-chief, where he transformed the company. I think I read that. 1980, became bestseller, blah, blah, blah. Read that. Editor-in-chief, yep, read that. Shooter had been in poor health in recent months, as he announced on his Facebook page that he would be canceling events due to health concerns back in June. It was posted on his behalf of Jim Shooter. Due to health concerns, Jim is pausing upcoming public appearances at this time. We want to thank you for your continued support and understanding Illustrated Media. Now, another thing I wanted to do, so these are some of the comics that were released during the Jim Shooter era at Marvel. And I will post links to all of this in the video description, so you can go to all of these articles and see all of this yourself. But it's not small things. It's not small things. These are big runs. These were, big things happening in Marvel. Not all good, right? It's not, you're not going to have 100% hits across the board, but I will say During his time at Marvel, you probably have some of the most consistent hits. And of course, I mean, who can argue against Secret Wars? Secret Wars was that sauce. I love Secret Wars. I wish Disney would have focused a little more on their series that they had, a little more on comic book accuracy. It is what it is. Not gonna, delve too far into that. But he had a really good run at Marvel, and he oversaw some absolutely astonishing events at Marvel. His impact was definitely felt. And people may not have liked him at the time. They may have taken issue with his approach at the time. I'm not going to say I guarantee, but I would be willing to bet people who took issue with Jim Shooter during the time he was editor-in-chief at Marvel would probably look back during that time, and say to themselves, "You know what? I understand why he was this way." You got to run a tight ship. You got to run a tight ship. And what I've heard in different articles and interviews with people who knew him is Jim Shooter ran a tight ship. You better be on time and you better give it your best. I can't say that I'm mad at that at all. So the comic book industry lost a great. He lived a long and successful life. And I wish the best for his family. And hopefully somebody rises up to take up that mantle of expecting excellence in what is delivered to the comic book fans.